Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a huge question that's hiding right under our noses. How do our minds actually make sense of the world? We're about to dive deep into cognitive semantics, a field that pulls back the curtain on the hidden logic behind how we talk, and more importantly, how we think. So let's start with a little puzzle. Have you ever heard someone say something like, "We need to iron out the bottlenecks," and your brain just stops for a second? Like, wait, what? This quote from way back in 1920 is getting at exactly that feeling. That little mental glitch isn't just a grammar mistake, it's a clue. It tells us that our brains have some deep rules about how ideas fit together. And figuring out what those rules are, well, that changes everything.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with that central puzzle of meaning. Then we'll look at the scientific revolution it caused in linguistics. We'll get into the pretty wild idea that we actually think with our bodies and how we build entire worlds in our minds. Then we'll peek into the toolbox linguists use to figure all of this out. And finally, we'll land on the big one: why this stuff actually matters to you.
Okay, first up,
Let's really dig into this puzzle. What is going on with our language that makes it so strange and so powerful? Think about it. We do this all day long and never even notice. We say we attack a weak point in an argument or defend a position. We're talking like an argument is a war. We spend our time, we waste it, we invest it. We're talking about time as if it's money. Why? These are abstract concepts. You can't touch an argument or hold time in your hand. So why do our brains constantly reach for the language of physical things to talk about them?
well, getting to the bottom of that question took nothing short of a revolution. It forced scientists to completely rethink their entire approach to what language even is. For a long time, language treated language as this formal, abstract system. First, with Saussure, it was seen as a structure of signs. Then Chomsky came along with this hugely influential idea that we have a kind of grammar module in our brain, like a computer. But then in the 80s, thinkers like George Lakoff and Ronald Langaker came along and asked a radical question. What if language isn't some separate computer program? What if it's the user interface for the human mind?
And that shift was massive. The old view basically saw language as a grammar plus a dictionary. You have these empty grammatical slots, and you just plug words into them. Meaning was kind of an afterthought. The new cognitive view said, no, that's completely backwards. Meaning isn't separate from grammar. It's the entire point. Language is an empty machine. It's a huge structured toolbox of meaningful patterns that we learn from our experience in the world. And this is where things get really wild. If meaning comes from our experience, then how does our physical life, living inside a body that moves and feels things, shape how we think about really abstract stuff like justice or ideas or even love? The core idea here is called conceptual metaphor. And please don't think this is about poetry or fancy writing. This is a fundamental cognitive mechanism. It's how your brain works. We take a concept that's abstract and hard to grasp, that's the target, and we understand it by mapping it onto something concrete and physical that we know really well from bodily experience. That's the source. This is so cool. Look at these examples. We systematically understand the abstract concept of argument in terms of the physical experience of war. That's why we use words like attack, defend, and win. Or we can use a different source, like journey. Then we cover a lot of ground or find ourselves at a crossroads. Same with time. We treat it like money. You can spend it, waste it, or invest it. And notice, these aren't just one-off phrases. They're whole systems of logic.
Okay, but you might be thinking, that's a neat idea, but is it real? Or is it just a clever way of talking about words? Well, the proof is honestly kind of mind-blowing. Brain imaging studies show that when you hear a sentence like, "Pablo kicked the ball," the motor cortex in your brain, the part that controls your leg, actually lights up. But here's the crazy part. When you hear, "He kicked the idea around," the same area of your brain lights up. Your brain is literally using its knowledge of physical kicking to make sense of an abstract idea about thinking. This is real. It's happening in your neurons.
And that's really the bottom line. As Raymond Gibbs puts it here, thinking isn't some disembodied, abstract thing that happens in a vacuum. It's rooted in our bodies. Our thoughts and our language grow directly out of the recurring patterns of being a physical creature in the world. Our minds are embodied. So these deep-seated metaphors are one huge piece of the puzzle. But our minds are also doing something else, something incredibly fast and flexible, all the time. We build temporary worlds to make sense of things on the fly. Let me just ask you to notice something. What happens in your head when I say the phrase, "if I were president"? See? Your brain didn't crash. Instantly, effortlessly, you set up a little hypothetical bubble, a scenario where I'm the president, and you can reason inside that bubble. How do our brains do that? How do we build these temporary little realities so fast?
The theory for this is called mental spaces, and the idea is that certain words and phrases like if, or in the painting, or Max believes, act as space builders. They're like little commands that tell your brain, okay, open up a new mental workspace. This new space is separate from our current reality, but connected to it. It lets us explore hypotheticals, understand stories, and even model what other people are thinking.
But wait, it gets even cooler. Our minds don't just build separate spaces. They can actually take two different spaces and smash them together to create something totally new. This is a powerful cognitive move called conceptual blending. You take some elements from one input space, some from another, project them into a new blended space, and boom, you've got a new idea, a new reality that didn't exist before. The absolute classic example of this is the computer desktop. Think about it. It takes one input space, a physical office with files, folders, and a trash can, and a second input space, the abstract world of computer commands. It blends them together. The result? A totally new but incredibly intuitive reality where you can drag a file into a folder. It feels completely natural, but it's a brilliantly engineered cognitive blend. And our minds do this constantly, for everything from jokes to scientific breakthroughs. Okay, so this all sounds amazing, right? Metaphors, mental spaces, blends. But how do linguists actually prove any of this? How do they get inside our heads and analyze these things? Well, they've got a whole toolkit of methods to make this a real science. Yeah, they don't just sit in armchairs and guess. They use corpus linguistics, which is basically scanning billions of words of text to find real systematic patterns. They run psychological experiments in labs, measuring reaction times down to the millisecond. They do typological analysis, comparing hundreds of languages to see what's unique and what might be universal to all humans. And they even create these things called semantic maps to visualize the very structure of ideas. Here's a great example of an analysis technique in action. What is a lie? Well, it turns out our concept of a lie isn't a simple yes-no definition. Researchers found we think in terms of prototypes. A perfect lie, the prototype, is when a statement is false, the speaker knows it's false, and they intend to deceive. That's Mo's story, definitely a lie. But as you can see, when you start removing those conditions, like with Nurse Brain, people get less and less certain. This proves our mental categories aren't rigid boxes. They're fuzzy, with a strong center and blurry edges. And all of these analytical techniques, all of this research, it all points back to this one fundamental idea, captured perfectly in this quote. The basic unit of our language isn't just a word or a grammar rule. It's a construction, which is just a fancy word for a pairing of a form, like a pattern of words, and its function, its meaning. Every single piece of language comes with its meaning baked right in. Okay, so we've been on quite a tour of the mind. But what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this matter outside of a linguistics department? Here it is. The single most important thing to understand is that language is not an abstract code that's separate from us. It is an embodied, living, dynamic window into the human mind. It reveals that our ability to reason is tied to our bodies. It shows us that our creativity comes from this incredible ability to blend ideas and build new worlds. Understanding how all this works isn't just about understanding language better. It's about understanding us better. It's a tool for better communication, better learning, and for thinking more critically about the world around us. So I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. If our language is the very tool we use to construct our reality, just imagine what becomes possible when we truly understand how to use that tool. What new worlds could we decide to build? Thanks for joining this explainer.